Okay, welcome back to our live session. Continuing the seminar, a bit late starting, but now the technical issues have been solved. So I will ask now, or give the floor to Dr. Roope Flinkman, who will have our next presentation. Please, Roope.
Thanks, Anne. Do you guys hear me all right? Yes. Yeah, they usually take a microphone away from me at karaoke, so it wouldn't be a problem. If you don't mind, I'll sit here and just keep blasting away. From the morning sessions of existentialism and emotions, we will now go into hardcore marine science and diving, and I will by force educate you into basics of climate change and the functioning of the Baltic Sea, and then we go into some wreck issues. And in the end, we'll try to discuss what the effects of climate change and environmental change in general in the Baltic Sea have on our underwater cultural heritage. First of all, my name is Juha Flinkman. Everybody calls me Roope. I have been called worse as well. My work is the ship you see in the picture. That's the Finnish research vessel Aranda. My background is in marine biology. I started off as a fisheries science in the 80s, moved on to zooplankton in 90s, and the last 15 years I have been the manager of the research vessel as well as a scientist on the side, mostly being chief scientist on the cruises. All along my studies from the 80s on, I have also been a scientific diver, and I'm one of the now gray-bearded old guys who created the European scientific diving standards in the 90s, and we weren't that gray then, but hell, it's what happens to you. Also, the topic of this seminar is very good for me. End of glory days. As of June this year, I used to be a technical diver. I am that no more. The age caught up with me, but other diving, the easy bit I can still do, and I even might do so occasionally. Anyway, let's go on. Climate change. My slides are in Finnish, but I will be speaking in English, obviously, so I hope you can bear with me. You probably recognize the place in the picture. That's the ferry terminal for this island. And this is a few years back in December, and we're actually in a situation, and which I will be speaking of shortly, that this is the new normal. In a few decades, this could be the water level at Kauppatori in the marketplace in Helsinki, about 1.5 meters higher than now. This still happens, and it has always happened occasionally. The standing waves, sea cheese during the pressure shifts in the Baltic Sea, Gulf of Finland, you get this, but they are actually becoming worse and worse. The Baltic Sea, it's a very small inland sea, so to say, perhaps comparable to the Mediterranean Sea, which is very familiar to Manu and Alena. But the difference here is that the Baltic Sea is much shallower. The connection to the world ocean is much narrower and shallower, and the drainage area is huge. So the rainfall has a huge effect on the water exchange of the Baltic Sea, and therefore the problems associated with climate are much more severe. Here you can see a satellite image of the Baltic proper with the blue-green algal blooms. And why we get these problems, it's obvious, and we will come to that shortly. And now we will sort of discuss this whole idea of the functioning of the sea, the effect of climate on it, and the effect on the sea itself, on its biota, and also the under sunken cultural heritage. Now, yes, I will be talking about the wrecks as well. This presentation will actually be in 3 parts. First, I will try to sort of briefly show you what climate change actually is, what it means. Then I will force you to understand how the Baltic Sea functions, and there will be examinations afterward. And then the third part, I will show you some images about the wrecks and what we do. I'm going to change my cap from marine scientist to Badevanne, old fart, and talk a little bit about what we do. Okay, the climate, the global climate is changing. This is the average temperature between 1995 to 2004 in comparison to 1940 to 1980. And as you can see, the most distinct change is in the polar regions. in the regions where it usually is cold in the winters. So this is the key message. This is what's happening. And also, when you go to the estimate on how it's going to be between 2070 to 2100, and this is in comparison to 1960, how it was in 1960 and 1990. So it's pretty obvious that there is a huge increase in temperature, and it's especially targeted towards the north, where we are right now. We are actually, if you have the, we're right here. This is latitude 60. So this is obvious, but what's causing this whole thing? This is the International Climate Conference, the graph on the increase of carbon dioxide. And please note that the scale on the y-axis, it's parts per million. So there isn't a lot of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere when you compare it to oxygen and nitrogen. It's parts per million. But still, when you double that, the effect is astounding. And when you look at the graph here, this is last 400,000 years. And from glacial studies, from deep sea sediment studies, we know that we have had as dramatic changes in temperature on this planet before, but never even close to this speed. And this is well demonstrated by the end of the curve here. It's just boom, skyrocketing up. And in my opinion, at least, being a humble scientist, this really coincides so strongly with the evolution of industrial revolution that there cannot be doubt, since there hasn't been that significant increase in volcanic activity. As long as anybody remembers, in the last 200 years, there hasn't been really big meteors hitting the Earth, causing a nuclear winter or whatever. So it's got to be something else. And Minna, you said in your presentation that we as humans have survived all kinds of crises. That's true. And practically all of those crises we caused ourselves, and this is one of them. The prognosis for warming up, and there's a huge bunch of graphs here, and all those abbreviations, they are different institutes that do research on this. For instance, the yellow one is a CSIRO, that's the Australian Environmental Institute. A big institute, and all of the other. So there's a slight difference, of course, as these are based on climate models. And the further you go from your actual data set, the bigger the variation is in the model. That's a problem. Predicting is difficult, especially if you want to predict the future. But it's pretty drastic as you look at it. And what happens when the climate warms up? The glaciers will be melting, and the sea level will rise. Also in the Baltic, the estimate in Helsinki to 2100 is about 0.8 to 1 meter, and this is actually an old estimate. The present one is. And what it does, it warms up. The glaciers are melting, snows are melting, sea level comes up, increased rainfall. So what does this happen? What does this mean to the Baltic Sea? In order to understand that, first we have to understand the Baltic Sea and its structure. It's a very, very shallow inland sea. When you think of it depends a little bit on how you count it, but the average depth is under 60 meters. The world ocean average depth is 4.8 kilometers. So it's a big difference there. Even the Mediterranean is much, much deeper. The depths are in 4 figures in meters. And then this is a very diverse basin, if you like. It's been divided by different sub-basins, and so different parts of the Baltic, even though it's a small sea, they're very different. First of all, there are the belts, these narrower sounds, and then Öresund, the main sound between Kattegat, Skagerrak, and the North Sea. So this is the connection to the world ocean. And then, as you go on, there is the Gotland Deep and the Landsort Deep on the Swedish coast. That's the deepest spot in the Baltic Sea, 459 meters. So it's not a lot. And that is actually just a canyon. It's like a Grand Canyon scored by glacial meltdowns and floods. It's not a huge area. Then what we have here is a very important feature. This this landform caused by the glaciers in foregone eons. They have formulated a bottom dam, a Salpausselkä, which crosses all the way across from Finland to Sweden, and it comes up to around 20 to 30 meters from the surface. So this forms a bottom dam, and it stops the deep water masses to enter the Bothnian Gulf system. This is very important. Whereas the Gulf of Finland does not have such a threshold or a benthic dam. Gulf of Finland is directly connected to the deep area of the Baltic proper. Okay, this we keep in mind, and then we look at the climate. The water exchange in the Baltic is dictated by a very big phenomena, a climatic phenomena in the northern hemisphere. It's called the North Atlantic Oscillation, and there's an index that is actually depicts the air pressure difference between the Canary Islands, not Canary Islands, but the Azores and Great Britain. And whichever way this index is, it dictates the rainfall, especially winter rainfall in the Fennoscandian area. And this, when you have the now index as positive, the Northern Atlantic winter low pressure systems are very powerful, and the high pressure is very powerful, and they direct the winter lows into Fennoscandian area, and hence there will be a lot of rainfall, a lot of snowfall in our area, a lot of water falling down on the drainage basin of Baltic Sea and ending up in the sea. When it's other way down, it's negative. Then the high pressure system on the equator is weaker, and these low pressure winter low pressure systems are being driven towards Central Europe and Mediterranean, and then these climatic winter conditions prevail in the Fennoscandian area. So we will have very little rainfall. It's going to be dry and cold. So there's less fresh water ending up in the Baltic Sea drainage basin. Here's the drainage basin. It's over 4 times bigger than the sea. We have closer to 100 million people these days. There's a lot of industry, a lot of population, and there's a lot of very, very efficient farming. So a lot of stuff ends up. Well, let's go back to the previous one here. A lot of stuff ends up into the sea with all the water that rains down on this area. It comes back. It flows down to the Baltic Sea. And when you think, for example, when you think of the Mediterranean drainage basin, it's a very, very thin line around the sea because you have the coastal mountains all over the place. The drainage area of the Mediterranean is a fraction of the sea's surface, whereas this is four times higher. Okay, and how do we get seawater then? We have to understand that the surface water, the fresh water, is flowing outwards all the time. The Baltic Sea is like a huge estuary, and the seawater only comes in pulses which require a very specific continuum, a climatic continuum where we have first a high pressure system, northeasterly winds driving water away from the Baltic, and the water surface is down, and then it changes overnight into a regular Atlantic winter storm blowing very heavily from the west-southwest with low pressure over the Baltic, are allowing the water surface to rise. And on top of that, you need to have new moon or full moon. What is that? The spring tides. The tide amplitude at Skagerrak, Kattegat needs to be highest so that it really drives the water through the sounds here. As you can see, the red arrows indicating the salt water influx. And there's not a lot of fresh water flowing on the surface, flowing outward, blocking this water. And only when it hits the Bornholm Deep, the Gdansk Deep, then it will start, this heavier, saltier water will start filling the basins one by one. And the important thing here is in the last is that it goes into the Gulf of Finland and circulates around the Gotland Island, but it does not get into the Botnian Gulf system. So the water circulation in the Baltic, it's 2 layers. The surface layers, fresh water going out, and the lower layer, it's salt water coming in, circulating. And what does that cause to the sea, the structure of the water column? This is a cut through the Baltic Sea from the Danish Straits here, Gotland Deep, and Gulf of Finland. And the color depicts the salinity. The bluer it is, the less saline, the redder, the more saline. And as you can see, here are the Danish Straits, the salt water, and then the one that we have here is on the bottom. Whereas Gulf of Finland is the eastern extremity with lots of fresh water coming in. Neva River is the biggest river running into the Baltic Sea. So here you can see a distinct feature. There is a halocline at 70 meters, the boundary layer between the deeper, saltier water and the fresh water on the surface. And then when you go on, here is a water column. And you have 2 distinct layers. First of all, you have the thermocline, which is at around 15-20 meters in the surface. That water above the thermocline, it warms up to even 20 degrees in the summer, and it falls below 0 in the wintertime. That mixes thoroughly. And then you have the halocline, which is at around 70 meters. The water between these two is we call the winter water, is constantly at around 4 degrees temperature. And then the water below the halocline, the deep water, it's exchanged only through these saltwater influxes. And also the saltwater influxes are the only means of bringing oxygen into that water. So when you have a lot of organic loading in that organic matter loading into the deep area, and there's biological breakdown, it consumes the oxygen. It goes anoxic, no more oxygen. When deep water goes anoxic, phosphorus is being released. It gets into the surface, and that was the reason for in the first slide, the big blue-green algal blooms. As you can see from this image, this is a German data. German is a very big marine research nation. They've been working on marine research for quite a bit. This starts from late 19th century, and these blue columns are saltwater intrusions and their volume. So there's a lot of data. There's 2 gaps. There's one here between 1914 and 1918 and 1939, 1945. The Germans were otherwise occupied by that time. They didn't have time to measure the saltwater influxes. But also we have to remember that these 2 periods, they're also the periods that resulted with all the good wrecks. And actually, it was touched here, the environmental problems of the wrecks in world ocean and also in the Baltic. That problem is serious. A lot of those wrecks contain a lot of oil, and it's now beginning from the first war, it's over 100 years, and they're getting older and older, they're rusting down, and eventually they break and release the oil. And that oil is not your extra virgin olive oil or your present-day fuel oil. It's very, very high sulfur content, probably even lignin oil, which is something that you couldn't even be allowed to produce these days. So this is something that you have to do something about it. And these 2 periods created over 90% of all the wrecks that are environmentally hazardous. And this is something we also have to think. It was mentioned here, war is one of the greatest ever environmental disasters. It's always been like that, especially after the ships started burning oil. And just to make you convinced that it's actually the rainfall and the global climate that dictates the water exchange of the Baltic, here is the temperature, salinity, and oxygen content of the Gotland Deep at 200 meters. And then when you look at this graph, this is an old graph, but I want to show this because this is the first one where it was really shown. This is the salinity at Gotland Deep, and then the other graph is river flow into the Baltic, and the scale is inverted here, as you can see. And just a little shift, and you see how well it fits. This is not a coincidence. So climate, rainfall dictates the Baltic water exchange. And that by doing that, it dictates what happens to the Baltic Sea. And here's another one. This is the NOW index I talked to you about, and this is the NOW index combined with the river flow, outflow, also inverted scale. So here you go. It's a pretty nice fit. And finally, I show you a few slides from previous winter to make you understand what this means for the Baltic. In the Baltic Sea, the salinity and deep water oxygen content, they go hand in hand, because remember, the only way the deep water can be oxygenated is through these saltwater influxes. So this is a transect from Danish Straits to Gulf of Finland, and this is salinity. Here's the halocline at 70 meters, the saline water in the west south here, and then it goes fresh towards Gulf of Finland. And when you look at the same image, instead of salt, you use oxygen. So this same area is practically oxygen free. It's devoid of life. Well, it's not correct to say it's devoid of life. There are sulfuric anaerobic bacteria which they continue the biological decomposition, but their end product is not carbon dioxide. It's hydrogen sulfide, which in its turn is toxic to any life form. So this is what it is. And then when you go to take another transect here, instead of going into the Gulf of Finland, we go into the Bothnian Gulf. And these are the Åland sills. This is the Åland sill, this is the Åland Sea, and this is the Bothnian Sea, Bothnian Bay. As you can see, the salt water does not enter; it cannot get into the Gulf of Bothnian system. So there are no such problems with oxygen deficiency there. But the main problem with the Baltic Sea, the eutrophication, it affects that area as well these days. It's getting worse and worse there as well. Anyway, the sea levels will rise. This is a prognosis for Helsinki and for Vaasa, and this is the average estimation of the rainfall. The latest current estimate of rainfall in let's say in 100 years in here is that it's about sevenfold of what it is now. And when we take all this into consideration, there's going to be a huge increase in water getting in the Baltic Sea. And what will that result for the Baltic Sea? We don't really know. Will it turn into a great big lake that is a meromictic lake like the Vättern in Sweden? It's anoxic water on the bottom, or like the Black Sea, which does no longer have any deep water exchange. We have no way of knowing, but it's what it is. Okay, this is the background. Now we'll go into the wrecks, and this is one of the good wrecks from the 40s, the previous EU. This is what we do. Badevanne is doing research on World War wrecks, but even though we like to do that, we stumble on these babies every once in a while, and then we end up helping Minna and other guys in the National Board of Antiquities, and it's okay. This is the Baltic Sea cultural heritage, and the fact is that due to these specific properties of the Baltic Sea I just talked about, the Baltic Sea keeps these wrecks better than any other place in the world. There's no shipworm, it's cold, low oxygen content, all the chemical processes, all the biochemical processes, all the biological decomposition processes are very low, and we don't have any major microscopic organisms that would chew on wood because it's too low salinity. They can't reproduce. So we have these guys, and like I said, the Baltic Sea does preserve them better than ever. So for us Badevanne guys, it has happened quite often that we go down hoping to find a nice Kriegsmarine or Krasnizvestia Paldiski float wreck, and instead we find these. But as said, the researching these can be fun as well. It's not all serious stuff, and obviously also non-archaeologist people can do this kind of stuff as well. I'll just show you a couple of images here. These are from a Dutch man of war from 1713, from the Great Northern War. Actually, the Swedish warrior king Karl XII was issuing these privateer permits to a degree that actually English and Dutch fleets were combined. And when you think of the Dutch and the English in fleet issues, it was not an easy feat, but it was so bad for business, these pirates, that they had to combine the fleets and have the merchant vessels to St. Petersburg in escorts. So this is from those days. Some other stuff from there as well, and then the previous year we were thinking of going down to this First World War Russian minesweeper, but there was a Dutch merchantman from early 17th century, a fluid, and now we're working on that. So these days it seems that increasingly we get less and less time on our own wrecks, and we have to do these old things. But what the hell? It's fun. Yeah. And well, for me it's actually quite okay as this end of glory days name of the seminar fits me quite well. I used to be a technical diver until this summer, so it's cool. Here's a picture of the transom board of that vessel. As you can make out, here is the year on the lower part, 1636, and here's the swan, the swan, and some other stuff. And this is first on the list to pick up and conserve, and hopefully it ends up in the Maritime Museum in Finland. Mauro in the audience could tell you guys much more about this plate. He's been much closer to it than I ever was, so you talk to him later. Here's some other stuff. This is a mystery wreck, a sloop of war outside Helsinki, and this image here, the cat's head. It has since then fallen down on the seabed, and Minna was in tow when Badevani raised it this fall, and it has been brought into the conservation lab and for some reason named Roope. Then there are new methods like the photogrammetry. Kari in the audience taught us how to do that, and he's very, very proficient in that. We have also learned, especially Jouni has picked up the technique. This is the same mystery sloop. And yeah, so it's the work we do, and I promise to discuss with you guys the future of these and the effect of the climate change on these wrecks. And the fact is that I have no idea. I have no idea what's going to happen. Will the warming up of the seawater affect the decomposition rate of these wrecks? Will the increased currents and stuff like that? And to begin with, will there be increased currents in the deep water? We don't know. Personally, I wouldn't believe that there will be such a big fuss about the ones that are deeper down. But the ones closer to the surface, undoubtedly there will be an effect. But first of all, we have to remember the morning sessions and not go into apocalyptic feelings. But we have to remember that it's all positive, and we can do things about it, and understand our anxiety, and dismantle it, and then think again. And always remember the fact that both for the eutrophication of the Baltic Sea, the climate change, the science that's been already done has shown us that yes, we can do things about it. For instance, the Gulf of Finland has actually improved quite a bit environmentally. And we know what to do about the climate change. That's a longer road, but we know what to do. We just have to do something about it and not feel bad about it. And also we have, in my opinion, we have to remember that we as individuals, the decisions are above us. And what we can do is influence the decision makers. But we personally, as long as we do what we can, we shouldn't feel bad about it. So instead of going into the pale riders, I'll just say thank you very much. This is me on the right side, and Jouni Polkko on the left side, and we are the original founders of Badevani. And Jouni keeps diving. I'm now on the surface support, and that's it. Thank you very much.
And our next speaker will be Ed Stockdale, who will actually then talk about the Scientific Diving Academy that has been established in Tvärminnen Zoological Station, and let's get Ed on stage. There you are. The floor is yours.
Okay. Does that work? Alrighty. I'll do it this side. I'll bring that over. There it is. Is it now? Still have technical issues? That should be it. Okay. Okay. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for attending. We do have people watching in Australia, so that's good evening to them. And I think there's some people joining us from the other side of the Atlantic in America, so good morning to them, if you are watching at this point. I'm going to talk about scientific dive training in the changing climate. My name is Ed Stockdale. I am the new coordinator, or the coordinator for the new Finnish Scientific Diving Academy, which has been established at the University of Helsinki's Fermi Station. Quick bit about me. I'm a background as a diver and an explorer, and originally a marine biologist. I am Australian, so to make the Scientific Diving Academy more interesting, they employed an Australian to come all the way to Finland to run it. And I've been a DSO, Dive Safety Officer, for scientific dive research projects all over the world with various universities and institutions. But this is now a new position to establish. So this is actually the first sort of public announcement about the Academy. We're not officially launching until next week. So you are the first people to sort of see the insight into some of the ideas and what I've been working on for the last few months to set it up. So to start off my talk, I'm going to talk a bit, and I'm going to take partially ideas and things that we've been discussing today. And I've been listening to them going, well, actually, I was going to talk about that as well, but I will anyway. And we're going to start with, this is an image of down near Hanko. So this is the Baltic, and this is what the Baltic can look like. And I'm going to talk quickly about observation versus and how you can make a statement about something. You look at a structural reef like this, and then you want to find out about how invasive species that might be coming in, or what the biodiversity of that area actually is. You actually need to implement a study. For example, this is an international or a European-wide experiment or observation study looking at the biodiversity observation network with the Assemble Plus network of research stations, which Tvärminnen is part of. So there's actually 5 of these based around Tvärminnen area, and they are used for monitoring in a measured manner biodiversity and also invasive species numbers into a region. Okay, so there's exactly the same unit, and it's scattered around by scientific divers in different areas, and they can use it to make very, very accurate comparisons between what's happening within a site and then between sites and overall across Europe. Here's another example. This again is a reef in the same region, very close to the previous photo. Okay, and this is a degrading reef. And what's happening here? How is it affecting our climate? How is it affecting the systems in general? Okay, we can observe it and go, this is bad. But what does bad mean? How do we stop it? How do we influence it? And I'm using this as an example that goes into the new research project that's starting at Tvärminnen Station, which I thought was very relevant to a climate change discussion, which is the coast climb system. Pretty much we've always been talking about carbon dioxide cycles and sequestering systems and using CO2, but nowadays there's less talk, or there's more talk about methane and its interaction, but they separate the systems of an atmospheric system and a marine system, okay, or a Baltic system, so brackish. And the question, this hasn't been started, it's about to start over the next 3 or 4 years, and it's a huge new project that's running. They're working with atmospheric scientists as well as marine scientists to quantify methane output and methane sequestering, as well as CO2 output relative to conditions, environment, degradation of the habitat, different habitats, and everything else. So it's a large-scale project. Again, you're taking an observation of something that, okay, it's bad, and you're actually making measurements so you can make definitive statements for management plans and protection plans. And the important message I want to bring home with all of this is it needs a scientific methodology. Okay, you have to actually have the scientists to do the research first before you can actually have implemented plans, and then also before you can communicate that to non-scientists, to the general public. Okay, and we've discussed the need for science communication intermediate or better ways to communicate these findings, which, yes, I do agree is important, but without the actual science being done first, you cannot make these sweeping statements or comments or changes. Okay, for examples of this is a study. I put this up again because it's relevant. This is part of Tvärminen's sort of background research. They've been keeping daily temperature recordings at the site for 120 years, give or take a few worldwide conflicts that happened sometime in the 20th century. So there's this large data set that they use, and there's actually very, very interesting experiments going on at the moment with one of the researchers there that's actually inducing heat waves in a locked system. So when you guys come on Monday, I'm actually introducing you to Norman, and he's going to talk about his heat wave experiment, I hope. But what I'm putting here is that we're looking about observation, general observation, something's happening here, and actually making measurements. And in my job, and what I do, is related to scientific diving. Okay, he's actually using diving as a tool to investigate what's happening underwater. All right, we've been talking a lot about scientific diving here today. We've been having it as a sort of a conversation, but we haven't actually really defined what it is, what it does, and what the components of it are needed to do. Okay, scientific diving is a occupational diving form. It's different to recreational sport diving, and I include technical divers. Recreational sport diving is divers who dive as a pastime, as a hobby, as an interest outside their actual profession, okay? Or train people to do that outside their profession, all right? It's different to commercial or construction diving, okay? People that do offshore work, that work doing bridge supports, that doing surveys on boats, all right? That is commercial work. Scientific diving sits alone. It's another form of occupational diving, okay? To be a scientific diver, you are a professional diver working in the field. That does not mean that you cannot do science diving if you're not in that field. There's two different sides to that, and you'll see where I'm going with that as this presentation goes on. It has different recognition, and sadly, the standards for scientific diving vary massively across the planet and from nation to nation. I've put the two examples here up because they are the two biggest regulatory bodies for a larger scale scientific diving sort of status in the regulations. The American Academy of Underwater Science, they are pretty much ahead of the game because in the 70s, when they started putting occupational health and safety into standard diving, commercial diving, occupational diving, they tried to split it out very rapidly. And they set up their own set of standards, regulatory guidelines, and structuring system to separate it from occupational dive safety, okay? And they did it very, very well, and it runs through all the American universities and institutions, Smithsonian, Woods Hole, like they all use the same set of standards across it. Europe was a little bit behind, but then also because we're a multinational sort of a conglomerate of countries, the panel, as Roope said, because he was involved very early on in the 90s when they started trying to form a panel to standardize training across the countries. And in 2007, the European Scientific Diving Committee was formed, and then it formed to the panel it is a classification of which body it sat under. It used to sit under the Marine Board, but then they're only allowed to sit under there for a certain number of years, and it got moved into the Mars network. And that's what the controlling body is. So every country that's a member of the panel in Europe has a representative that is part of it. Not all the countries in Europe are on the panel. Finland is. It's one of the leading countries that actually helped develop the European scientific standards. And they all have an agreement. We have a set of standards for different levels of occupational scientific diver. Okay, so there's the European scientific diver and there's the advanced European scientific diver, which are recognized across all those countries that are part of the panel. Okay. In other countries, the regulations can go anywhere from you need to have a hard hat, like full Kirby Morgan offshore style hard hat, all the way through to you can do whatever you want with any ticket. As long as you've got an open water ticket, you can go and do science. Okay, so it's it varies from country to country, but there are rules and regulations that come into effect. In Finland, we're very lucky. We had very, very early on as well separated scientific diving under its own advisory body, okay, and coordination. And the coordinating body is STOI, or the Finnish Scientific Diving. I keep forgetting the two because the acronym for the Finnish Scientific Diving Academy is one S less. There you go, thank you. Steering Association. And they've been controlling the sort of regulatory. So we have a national examination for scientific diving in Finland that requires you to sit it. At the moment, there's one governing body that can do the examination. And it's quite an intense, it's full face masks, it's using tethers, there's a large task loading component to it. That will maybe change in the next couple of years with my new position. But it means that we do have control. You're not required to have that to work in science though, which is why we have citizen science organization teams like Bardavana, like MAS, that can actually assist with research that's going on without having to have these certification levels, okay? But certain employers require you to have them, to work for them, as an occupational, not a volunteer. Okay, there are other countries, like for example Norway, you would not be allowed to do as a volunteer on a project. It's like you have to have the certification before you can even go and assist on, as a volunteer, say an archaeological excavation work or a marine biology survey, okay? Finland, we've been hearing, Minna talked about it, Rob has talked about it, discussions popped up here and there quite regularly that there's been a demand for scientific divers, okay, the next generation of divers, and there's been a lack of education options for people within Finland and Europe-wide for the last 10 years or so. Funding's been cut from research institutions all the time. The cost of diving is quite high, and the experience that you need to get up to the skills is also quite long, so there hasn't been much going on. So late last year, early this year, a group of people that have a lot of influence or need for scientific diving within this country formed a steering committee, acquired funding to set up the new Finnish Scientific Diving Academy. So it was established this year. Actually, it was established on the 2nd of August when I moved to Finland for the first time. And I've spent the last 2 months putting the groundwork down for launching officially next week, and then running courses from next year onwards. There's a lot of people in this room who have had various conversations with over those last 2 months, so this is sort of bringing it all together. Okay. Basically, we've been driven by a need for scientific dive training here and also within the Baltic region and then further afield in Europe. And the aim or the goal of the Academy is to train scientific divers at all levels, from the advanced European scientific diver to required specialist skills to the general public of divers, citizen science divers that want to learn how to use scientific techniques so they can assist better on volunteer projects. All right, so there's a full spectrum. The aim is to make the FSDA the center of training or connection for all those levels so that we can better the science output that we're doing, which means that we can better the results and the quality of what we're getting, and we can then put it up to the next step. Because like I said at the beginning, without that science being done, we don't have the ability to make or implement proposals or make changes, etc. Okay. The goal is to create, within 3 years, we're hoping we're going to be one of the leading cold water-based research diving facilities in the world, probably much because we have so much unique, or so many unique environments within this region that we can use to train people from other parts. We have all the complications of cold water diving that we all know about, with the exposure, the extra gloves, the dexterity, conditions, etc., that can be beneficial to researchers from outside of this region as well. We're going to be integrating techniques. Like I said at the start, I'm a diver explorer, I'm a cave explorer, mine diver, wreck diver. I have been for my whole life. I've been diving since I was 12, so that's 26 years. I've lost count of actually how many dives I've done. So for the last 4 years, I've claimed I've got 5,000 dives, because that's when I lost my logging process somewhere along the line. But I've experienced a lot of different regions, a lot of different areas, had access to a lot of different expertise in different countries. And it's really, really funny in diving, where you have these different disciplines, and there's certain skills that take place in one that could be really, really useful to the other, but there's no communication between the two. For example, cave explorers have ways of laying line and surveying really, really fast that could be very, very relative to an archaeological team that are trying to measure a wreck, or a biological team that are trying to set up a survey area in a much more rapid manner than the techniques they're presently using, and vice versa. So we're going to be developing these techniques into the training systems that we're doing, and we're also going to start involving more advanced technologies. There's so many tools that are coming out in the underwater world, but again, they're kept in their separate little niches, and having a place where we can actually change those and do that. This week I was actually using an underwater propulsion system, like a scooter, to do very, very rapid surveys of an area that we're using for the new coastclimb study, or the researchers using for the coastclimb study. So we managed to cover ground and allow the professor and the other researchers to very, very quickly go, oh, this is good, this is good, this is not, this is good. Okay, we now have an idea. Instead of spending 3 days swimming around in circles, we could just do it in one. Never really thought about that before, because that's not a tool that's generally used in scientific diving outside of a few Antarctic projects and things like that. So that's just one example of applications that we can use. So it's already been mentioned. The station's based at Tvärminnen Zoological Station. This is where it is. This is my domain. This is the dive sheds. My house is somewhere at the back over there, because I actually live on station. It's one of the premier, like I said, it's been there for 120 years, 119. Next year's the 120-year anniversary of the region, and that's the access to the study areas and everything. If you're interested in coming to visit or link in with the academy afterwards, you can always get my details and we'll communicate. So we talked about what I'd like to do with the academy and where it's going to go, but the actual programs that we're going to be offering as it goes are everything from European scientific diver levels to citizen science courses, to trying to re-establish tertiary education curriculum dive level training. So bringing in dive courses to either the bachelor programs or the master's programs. Okay, that's a fight that I'm going to have over the next few years. Hopefully it will be successful, because we need to train the next generation of scientists with the field techniques abilities to do what the previous generations have been doing so well, but now they don't have a training option because funding's cut. Okay, it's very hard to persuade a university nowadays that their undergraduates need to learn how to do scientific diving technique for future work, because that's a very, very expensive program to run for an undergraduate program, but it's something that's needed. So what do? They either cut the diving research or they send them out afterwards and get them to go and work it out themselves. We're going to do consultancy and customized training. And for example, if a group of researchers want a specific project and they're not really sure how to address it, they can approach. And specialist areas of training and advanced technologies, and including that. For example, we're going to be offering photogrammetry training programs, of which I'm not going to teach them. I'm going to employ an expert like Gary or someone else to come in and teach them for me, because I fully understand that this is not, I can't teach everything here. So that's the next step, is it's going to grow. We're going to pull expertise from within Finland, which has a huge amount when it comes to diving, but also from overseas, and grow it as a globally recognized destination for that sort of level. I keep talking about the next generation because I think it's very important, and that's why I'm sort of giving an example here of what I'm thinking about, is funding cuts are just, we're losing scientists with field skills. I mean, I remember when I was an undergraduate student studying zoology, and when I was a postgraduate student, we did a lot of field-based courses, but even back then they were cutting the field courses. So 2 or 3 light years after I finished up, and I was working as a researcher before I disappeared on my diving track, the courses that I'd done 5 years previous, they'd been cut because they weren't applicable anymore. but then all of a sudden we don't have biologists that have those skills. I mean, can you imagine trying to tell like a chemistry graduate that they don't actually need to do any lab work? They can do it all theoretical because they can't afford the glassware anymore. It's a comparative idea, I believe, that in field biology. So in 2022, the theory is at the moment that I'm going to be having a group of archaeology undergraduates joining me for a 4-week training program to study basic scientific diving techniques and suitable archaeological survey techniques to work on the End of Glory Days project that is running here. So they're doing it on a work experience-based program. So Minna, myself, and one of the professors at the university have come together with this idea that they're going to do the training program with me for 4 weeks, and they're going to go and work with Minna for 2 weeks, actually as her sidekicks in the field and gain experience that way. So then we developed new divers for the next generation of going into maritime archaeology, because they have direct field experience while they're already doing their bachelor's. So that's kind of sort of the idea. If you imagine we could change the words archaeology to BSc marine biology, and then similar projects. That's kind of my goal as well as the other side. Okay, so I'm going to go sort of full circle back to where we started and talk about the professional science versus the citizen science sort of concept, and show that they're not mutually exclusive and one is not more important than the other in the way that things work, okay? Because in this room there are professional scientists who are also scientific divers, okay? And then there are also people who do diving as a hobby or an interest field that are also involved in science, okay? We know that from the discussions that we've had today. So the example of a professional science team or a professional diving team are scientists that use diving to test a hypothesis. To them, it's a tool. It's the labware, like the lab experiment. It's the measurement system that they use. Okay, a geneticist might do a PCR run to work out some area of their research. A field marine ecologist will use diving as a tool in their network. Okay, for example, Tvärminnen zoological station at the Uni of Helsinki has basically been the hub for marine biology, field diving-based ecology work in this country for a long time. Okay, they basically carry out cross-disciplinary research. For example, this new Closkin project. Okay, and they ask a question or a study plan of what they want to do, and then they go out and they test it. And then they analyze the data afterwards, okay, and they produce the results, and they collaborate internationally with different networks. And this is, for example, Tvärminnen researchers in Denmark working on eelgrass down there to relate to a project that was done on both sides of the Baltic, related to the salinity and oxygen input that Ropa was talking about as well, okay. This is a publication from the station, or linked to the station as well from this year. So to them, or to a professional scientific diver, the science is the priority and the diving is just the tool, okay? It's just something that has to be done, and they have to have the training to do it, okay? The citizen science sort of style idea is it's a contribution run by scientists, so that it's people that are divers who want to contribute to a project, but it's not their project as such, okay? They are working with professional scientists that cannot do the work themselves, or they need extra assistance, okay? And I will use a presentation that we've seen quite a lot fly around, mostly because I actually have like the honor of being a member of this team. And so there's a thing, I'm a professional scientific diver. I do my area of research with scientific diving, but I am also working in citizen science projects as well, okay? It's a specialist dive team that then collaborates with the archaeology teams, or it doesn't always have to be archaeology, it could be Ministry of Environment and other studies like that, to meet the needs of whatever that scientific team is looking for. And for example, this summer, we were working with Finnish Heritage and Minna, okay, and also professor from Stockholm that was over as part of this project, which is the Fleet. Okay, the team itself produces a 3D model of it. This is actually a photogrammetry model of the whole Fleet wreck, so that the archaeologists can then manipulate it and look and get exact measurements of what it looks like under the water, okay, and then go, actually, we need you to go here and measure this, or we need you to go there and do that. And they actually have something they can manipulate and look at without having to do 85-meter dives with 3-hour run times, okay? Because to get to that level of training takes years of dedication within your technical diving career, okay? This summer, for example, with the flipping of the transom plate, and then the recovery of one of the items, okay, was defined by Minna as the researcher, and Nicholas Eriksson, who was the professor from Stockholm, like, we want this done, we want that done, okay? In this case, I'm a citizen science diver because I'm a marine biologist by training. I don't know what they're after in terms of questions. They go, I want that. Okay, I'll go and get that for you. Boom, all right? Which is actually what happened in the case of one of the items that was raised. So that's sort of a comparison of the two. And that's the sort of message I'm trying to push across on them. And I'm going to bring this all the way back around to the sort of climate research. As the climate is changing, and I mean that in two terms, the climate is changing in terms of the actual climate change heating effect, but also as in our scientific world is changing as governments decide that science is not so important and they want to put the money into something else that doesn't seem as important. Or they're focusing on different areas. The needs of the research are becoming more focused together, and to do that we need scientific divers for the areas that I work in. We need people trained in all different types of areas, but we need scientific divers. So the Academy was established to meet the needs of the present, but also for the future, so that we can generate and put Finland back as one of the leading nations in the world for scientific diving in general. Okay, and the training is there. It's for professional scientists all the way to citizens, because they're both important for their own drive in the research needs. Okay, and they're not mutually exclusive, all right, but they are not the same thing as well. And it's very important to try and explain that, and I'm quite happy to discuss it later on if people want to ask more questions about it. My big message from this is we need to understand and document things before we can change and protect them. And to do that, we need to use scientific methodology, and to do that, we need to have people trained correctly to do it. And that's basically what my job seems to be. Ask me in 2 years. And at the end of that, if I have time, I will take any questions about what I've done and what I'm doing.
And our next guest will be coming all the way from England. So let me see if I get this one working. Yep. Okay, so we have the David Cleesby talking about the Porkkala Rec Park, and I hope that we get this thing working. Yeah, floor is yours, David.
Of the European Union now. Unfortunately, I apologise for Brexit. I'm on holiday. I'm sorry I couldn't be with you there today. Thank you for the talks this afternoon. They've been very informative, particularly the science talk. That's informed me a great deal about many of the issues that affect the Porkkala Rec Park, and Ed's talk on citizen science, I think, leads quite nicely into our talk, which is about a citizen science project. I hope you can hear me. So the Rec Park is set in a very beautiful natural environment. It's often very tranquil. It's sometimes very wild. Just going to move some on my screen. Thank you. And it's also an environment that is yet quite unspoiled. This is Traska Bay Harbour, which we often use as a base and an anchorage. And it's a beautiful, beautiful place in the evening.
David,
Yeah.
sorry, we can't see your screen. We just see that you are started screen sharing.
It says, okay.
Try again.
Try again, technical. Yeah. How's that?
That's great, thank you.
Start again. I know we're behind time, which is a bit of a shame. Did you hear the beginning of my talk?
Yes, we talked it. Yeah, we heard it.
So this is the Rec Park. I'll just say that again if you didn't see it. It's a very beautiful place full of wildlife, some beautiful sheltered places. This is Traska Harbour, which we use as a sheltered anchorage. It's protected from the south, east and the west pretty much. It's a beautiful spot for divers and also for boating communities. And sometimes it's quite wild. It is a natural environment with all the pleasures and hiatuses that causes. Underwater, it's just as spectacular. We have this wreck here, the Sangbodem, which we dived this summer. A beautiful anchor, but the wreck itself is a jumble of timbers all crushed into a gully. Quite spectacular and has variety of its own. This is the Edmund, which is the most structurally intact wreck in the park. We dived that this summer and did some recording. This isn't our own photo, I should point that out. And we also dived on the Rundschau, which was my favorite because it's the first time I've actually seen cannon sitting actually on wooden carriages, still intact, sitting at the bottom. And to the right here, you can see photogrammetric representation as well, which is a useful, normal tool we try to employ on every wreck that we actually look at. And there are other cannon sites there as well, so a lot of exciting things to look at. This is the marina we work out of. It's important to stress this because without this marina, we couldn't be able to get our larger boats in. We need the resources they have. There's a shop, restaurant, free parking, also fuel, of course, and it's a quiet, organized space. And we should never forget that it's actually an environment which is shared by boaters, tourists, come for the day, people live in the area, islanders come in to the environment, to the place to actually get their supplies. And most important for some Finns, it has a sauna. The Rec Park itself is on the south coast in the Gulf of Finland. There are 5 others. I should point out that the Gustav Adolphus Rec Park in Helsinki is actually the first set up in 2000 by Sally-Maria Tikkanen. It set a good standard for other rec parks to come. As a background, Baltic project estimates over 100,000 wrecks in the Baltic. And Hula.net, which is our local kind of web page for itemizing the wreck sites to visit, has 2,700 known ones. However, that's just the known ones. And the Finnish Heritage Agency database lists 69 underwater sites alone of important ancient remains in the Porkala area, most of them in the Rec Park. This diagram, this chart actually gives you an idea of the complex topography of the area. There are many, many small rocks which actually basically protrude up and make these passageways between seemingly clear avenues very, very tight and difficult to navigate. And you can see the waves breaking over a rock above there. So why would we form a rec park here? Well, there's a load of wrecks. I mean, it's common sense, but particularly this whole area offers a sort of relatively sheltered internal intracoastal passages for travel and trade along the coast, west-east, east-west. And it's out away from the open sea. It has many sheltered anchorages. And ironically, unfortunately, these rocks mean lots of opportunities for wrecking. It's also probably a good route to go across the Gulf of Finland to Estonia, instead of taking the whole route around the Gulf, past Russia and back to Estonia. So it saves time, perhaps historically, and Traska Island itself has water, fresh water, so very useful. And it's probably being used, visited by many, many ancient boats in the past. Unfortunately, we have yet to really find those, except the Lapari boat, which is around about 1000 AD. And many navies in historic times have actually fought over the area, the Swedes, the Brits. I don't know what we were doing there, but I do know, but we fly our flag everywhere. And the Finnish, very strategic waters that needed perhaps a degree of control over. And the whole site has been, before our project, has been dived for many, many years by many dive clubs who have amassed considerable local knowledge of the sites. And the park itself would offer a variety of sites for divers and researchers. You have intact wrecks, you have spread out ones, shallow, sheltered, exposed, metal, wood, and some of them very, very old, perhaps 700, 800 years old. And the whole area, I believe, has the potential to actually tell the maritime story of not only this region, but Finland and the Baltic story itself. And of course, we have effective local facilities, as I've shown you already, for our quite large boats to actually get in, which are a lot larger than smaller yachts. How did the Wreck Park project start? Well, Marco Luotto, our chairman, who's in the back there, he perceived after seeing the Gustav Adolphus Wreck Park that perhaps we hadn't gone very far with accessibility for divers to sites, historical sites. And he married this with the Dr. Wreck concept from the UK's Nautical Archaeology Society, which I've been a member of for a long time, to see if our society could adopt some of these wrecks, and not even a few wrecks, perhaps a park of many wrecks. And an adopter would actually research a site, document it, even publicize it and protect it over the years. This idea seemed to catch flight with different groups, and it seemed an ideal project for our society. It was a healthy challenge to focus on. It gave practical diving experience and training in maritime archaeology, and people got to see more of the wrecks. And the society itself has many, many members who knew many of the wrecks. They've done some professional level recording in the past. All the divers I've seen have been excellent, and they've also brought their own clubs, shared expertise and resources to the project, without which we couldn't do, particularly bringing their own boats. And as a society, you should remember, we are only, apart from funding we can get from outside sources, we are actually limited to the volunteering power that we have from our members. So, for them and for us, it was a big, big commendable challenge to take on. So 2018, Marco and some others, his club, they picked an area. Traska seemed perfect. There were 4 wrecks quite close together, the Cannon wreck up on the top right. Then the Barrel wreck, which is about 17 meters, and the Alco wreck, which is around about 8 meters. So it seemed quite close together, and it seemed a good idea to link the 2 sites together. So they basically put an anchor buoy down, which you can see on the bottom left, and that allowed diving boats to come along and just moor to that buoy, and meant that they didn't have to actually drop their own anchors onto the site and perhaps cause damage by dragging them through the wreck. And on top of actually putting the anchor there, the anchor buoy, they actually put lines under the water, which allowed divers to actually negotiate safely between the wrecks and orientate themselves. So it made it much easier, much less stressful for them. On top of that, they did detailed photogrammetry of the site, produced these fantastic dive slates, which actually highlight details of the wreck, points of interest, and also give them directions underwater. These actually can be purchased and actually taken underwater, like a tourist with a tourist guide. Here's one is actually just next to the Barrel wreck itself, and so that you can look at that, and then you can go around on what seems to be a highlighted tour all around the site, whichever direction you want to. and you can go between the wrecks back and forth as you wish. Made to measure, really. So after that, 2019, we upped our game and we decided to have a field camp. We brought loads of equipment to the project as is needed. We repaired and upgraded the diver trails. We checked the wrecks for deterioration or damage. And this is an important feature that now we're here there to monitor, not just, the experience for the divers, but the wrecks themselves. And we've done this every year on and off, basically maintaining the park. This is our sustainability idea. And also we've orientated divers to other wrecks in the park. So they've actually got an overview of the whole park. And everyone worked very hard to their own ability level, an amazing amount of enthusiasm. Morale was good despite various understandable teething issues. After work, we had free time. As you know, divers always live for food and sometimes beer, but not always before a dive, hopefully. And in Finland, it has an obligatory hot sauna has to be had and a cold dip in the sea. And sometimes that's taken naked. I'm showing you any pictures of that. A few things didn't go so well. Bad weather, unavoidable, but there was always somewhere perhaps we could go where we were a little more sheltered for a dive. And we trialed a limited excavation equipment, didn't go so well. Our Nessie unfortunately died. We also had a laser scanning experiment, which was very interesting to see in action. And sometimes communication broke down. We had several boats basically at the same time doing different projects. Not so easy, and we learned a lot from that. And afterwards, in several meetings, we reflected on everything. We took feedback from the members as is correct. And we learned to rejig our organizational strategy and also our goals. So we learned also not to overstretch ourselves and overreach ourselves. 2020, bigger and better. So this is now our flotilla, our fleet. I think it's been called by some people the largest civilian fleet in the Baltic. And also we organize ourselves better. We borrowed some documentation from the Nautical Archaeology Society. So we have risk assessments for tasks as well as for the sites. And also we got the divers that are involved in planning their dive and also writing up their findings so that we could decide if a task had been done and then perhaps what needed still left to be done. And we also gave folders to each boat so they had their own documentation, but also so they could work relatively independently. We did our usual park maintenance and repair. So, each wrecks were checked for deterioration since the last inspection or damage or plundering, of which luckily we found little plundering, none at all in fact. We replaced canisters, we cleaned signs. We even put these nice little direction points onto the roads, on the lines underneath to make it easier. And we sort of started to set a pattern by which we would renew the park in June or July, or as needed. And pleasure divers could use it from April to November or December. Obviously bad weather again. That was a fun day. I get seasick very easily, unfortunately, for a maritime archaeologist. And it should be noted that last year, outside of the camp, 22 days were spent actually diving, looking on other projects, recording, taking samples. A bigger feature of what we were actually doing for that year, because we had a lot of funding for it, was to start to date some of the sites. So we've pioneered this compressed air drilling platform that sits nice and secure on top of timbers. And members were invited and trained to actually use this equipment. And sometimes they could get a specimen done within just 10 minutes. And an important feature for this is that we only produced very little damage to the actual timbers themselves. So we came up with these cores, which obviously we put into water and then fridge them, send them off to the dendrochronologist, who then actually compares the tree rings inside these specimens with those from like the sequences for the Baltic and Northern Europe, for oak and pine. And we can get some reasonably good dating information. They also take carbon-14 from these samples as well. We actually can tell also to some extent about the origin of the species. So we have an idea of trade as well as date. travel directions in the future. Our members, this wasn't an easy task to do, but caught on very, very quickly to doing it. And they showed a lot of excitement and a lot of proficiency with their diving skills. And also, a lot of pride in bringing these specimens up. 2021, this year gone by, we were lucky that Museo Verasto came along and did some side scans solar, looking for new finds on the site, finds outlying from the wrecks that we have. And we found a lot of new contacts. They also helped us scan some of the old ones as well. This is some of the tracking data, very systematic in Traska Harbour. And then they can overlay side scan onto the tracking. So once we've got some objects we've seen underwater, then we also were using this system that Museo Verasto has, which the Finnish Heritage Agency has, which are called UVIs. You put these beacons in the water, 3 of them, the third one's off to the left, and you can triangulate underwater where a diver, wearing this sort of beacon, you can see on a cylinder on the back. I've seen them one on the head, which looks very silly. The divers can be pinpointed underwater, not just within the triangle, but outside of that. And they also will take this tablet down with them, so a find, a contact can be put onto the screen, the diver can dive straight to it, and the boat can also monitor where they've been. Very, very useful. We also upped our task planning, set out priorities for each site, and also we had plan Bs and plan Cs if the weather changed. We had daily briefings. This is Marco in the morning, telling us what we need to do and taking information and feedback from members. We also got we changed our paperwork into Finnish to make it obviously more useful for the Finns, Finnish and English, and people took a lot of pride in filling in these forms. It took a little encouragement sometimes, but it took a lot of pride in actually putting their information down and also using their methodology, in developing their methodology for themselves about how they do a task, what archaeology is. Relaxation time, of course, very, very important for all of us. Team bonding. This is our social sustainability, how we keep ourselves going, and also letting off steam. And I have to say that I murdered a Beatles song really, really badly, which I still have nightmares over. But moving on to sustainability issues. There are historic problems with divers, diving communities as such, diverware, divers touching wrecks, treasure hunting or trophy lifting. I haven't seen that much sign of treasure hunting in the park so far, but it is potentially possible. And also boats, as we say, haphazardly anchoring or dragging their anchors through sites. Finland, is commendable because it has blanket Finnish protection laws. And also I've seen in the dive organizations and the club training that a very strong emphasis on an ethic on not tampering, not touching sites and not removing. But, it does still happen. And also overcrowding on sites. And I'll come back to it in a minute quickly, that at the moment there is no system to monitor how many boats go to which sites. And also pleasure boat anchoring. So I think in the future we hope to talk more with marine authorities and boating organizations and just give them more information about what we do and why, so they can avoid dropping their anchors into areas they shouldn't. We have a media presence, I suppose, that we can say that. Ule seemed very, very pleased to actually involve us in understanding cultural heritage. This is Minna from the Finnish Heritage Agency and Marco, our chairman. Ule seemed very interested in us to take pride in its cultural heritage of the country. And also this is a good avenue for us to give our information out. We get interviewed on the boat as well. This is Katja, one of our members, doing outreach at the boat show in Pasila, at which we also have a rec seminar every year and every spring. So we get to give out our information on 2 different fronts. And of course, this is our website, giving updates about the field camp, and the Porkala Rec Park website, which I have to say, needs updating, which we'll get onto soon. What particular climate threats to the Rec Park cultural heritage are there? Well, I can't really give any detailed science, I mean, comparable to what Rupa has already spoken about, but Finland's low-lying, and it's characterized in particular by lots of inlets inland. So a 1 meter plus sea level rise and storm surges would destabilize or even disable the marina. These island and shore economies are quite vulnerable because they're low-lying to the water. And also it would up the rates of coastal erosion deposition. So, and we'd have perhaps overloaded rivers and large-scale flooding. And as we've already heard many times, at the moment, we enjoy great preservation for our wrecks. But a salinity rise would mean that perhaps ship-borne worms would reappear and our wooden ships would be at risk. And also, I imagine there's going to be some widespread general societal disruption crises to people's lives and society, which will mean that underwater cultural heritage may not have the same priority as it has now. And that's saying something. To the local ecology, we're all talking about temperature rises in the Baltic, threatening species and their life cycle. Sea acidification, marine organisms need to form shells. Predicted rainfall may well cause more runoff into the sea from land pollutants, which is a scary idea. And microplastic pollution may well get pushed more into the Baltic, causing problems of its own. And of course, although we don't have that many modern wrecks in the park at the moment, the release of harmful oils and chemicals is also a risk. So what does our project do to offset these? Well, we're trying to start to think about a combined cultural and environmental approach. So no diving happens, no archaeology happens without the planet we live on. And there's this nice quote I heard from, from Sylvia earlier this week: with no blue, there's no green. I mean, it can't be any simpler than that. We have boats. Boats use diesel. Unfortunately, I've heard mention of biodiesel being used, but also the potential issues with storing it, that it can clog engines. So we need to look into tech solutions for these issues. Electric boats. And we tried to solve some of these problems by using, instead of moving the big boats around, we use pickup boats, and we don't sometimes come back into harbour as often. So we try to reduce fuel. We also try to source recyclable or reusable materials to reduce the microplastic pollution, and also just cut down on general waste, and remove items from, from the sea that we don't need, like confusing ropes and other materials. This isn't from our site, this is from the Burster, which we dived on recently. And also we have some great cooks, and they produce nice, fresh, non-processed food, which is tastier, helps morale, and also cuts down on waste. And we use onboard compressors to reduce trips to the shore. I'm not sure if the technology can be made more eco-friendly in the future there. And also it reduces noise pollution, because we have to live with our neighbours in the marina. We're in one shared community when we're there. Few sustainable ideas off the top of my head, but they're very common sense. We should start measuring our carbon footprint and either reduce it more or offset it. And perhaps we can form more partnerships with marine biologists and others. I heard Panu talking earlier this week with the group he's involved with. We can gather data on marine habitats, fish species numbers, health, water temperature, microplastic levels. We can do that quite easily. We should perhaps liaise with the marina staff and other communities to plan for adaptive change for the future. As far as cultural ideas come, we probably should try and get going a system by which dive boats report or advertise their visits to certain sites when they're going, so that we know that which sites are used more often, which are more vulnerable, and perhaps we can reduce that by coordinating those dives more. Perhaps we could be sort of a central contact point, and we can give information back and forth to the dive crews. There should be, we may have to actually police sites more in the future, so more liaison with Coast Guard and heritage agencies. And also, Ewan Hislop gave a good talk about buildings being enclosed earlier in the Oslo conference, about enclosed, or some are actually structurally upright and vulnerable. Perhaps we can look at wrecks in the same way, ones that are more vulnerable to snagging, ones that are more vulnerable to weather conditions that set on the side of islands where the weather conditions are worse. And also, we need, I think, to deploy in the future a landscape approach that doesn't just look at wrecks, but it tells Porkler's story from prehistory to the present, because there are many land habitation sites from the Stone Age which are now submerged and easily in diver territory. And this is something that's not been talked about when we talk about sustainability, but not so much about resilience, which is another topic in a sense. How we resist these destructive changes from climate change. So things like social bonding, community identity, which is why I've been talking quite a lot about talking with different communities to share our sense of solidarity. This is just a list of the wrecks we've done on the project. There are many of them. But there are many more wrecks out there, and many also, many wrecks that don't have names, and many not found. The ones in red are some of the interesting dates we've actually found for wrecks. So going back to, let's say, the 13th century, that's probably a little bit optimistic, but certainly a lot older than previously we thought. Our project itself has sustainability. It has momentum. Even with bad weather, we've actually produced more and more effective work. We've upped our professionality. So we are a citizens science project that's growing. We plan more trips in autumn this year, spring dives next. And then we have a final field camp, not the final one, but final one on the current funding. And then we should reassess and go for the year after that. And also we'll be producing a report for about the last 4 years next year. So are we too tired to carry on? Clearly I was, but that's because we are working hard. I think no. Porkler Rec Park expects every man and woman to get up there and give their finest for club and country. I love this class. This is on the thanks to everyone who, this was back in 2019. There's a good publication in Bortigar about how to create a park. And thanks to many, many more people aren't included on there. And also not just mention the divers and the organizations, but the families, who basically support us, when we actually go off for many, many weekends to do our work. And thank you very much for listening.
Okay, so now the program will go that way, that we will have a word from the Marine Archaeology Society. That was correct, Minna. And then we will have one launching of the competition after that, and then we give Roope the last words. So first the Marine Archaeology Society, please. Yes, the floor is yours now.
I wasn't prepared. What was I supposed to say? Oh, okay. Vesa, please join. You are just as guilty as I am.
Run up the usual suspects.
So
this is a bit ad hoc because just a moment.
Just to start with, started in Marseille. 3 people. It started in Marseille. 3 people were, having a glass of champagne and think. Oh, what is it? Yeah, but was it breakfast? Anyway, that was the beginning. Since that, the idea has been introduced to a lot of people inside Finnish Marine Archaeological Association. And quite honestly, a lot of times I've been thinking, is it realistic or not? Lately in this year, together with Markku and Minna, we have been discussing the issue, and finally I am convinced. And you know, I want to be inside and doing it. And most probably we will try at least. It's a big thing, and even if Markku is proposing something which you know, a lot of people might think it's unrealistic, but you know, after the introduction and yeah, I don't know if Markku has that presentation, but after the presentation, you know, people inside, it's only a few people, but it has to be convinced. And I'm getting convinced, which is not so easy.
Okay. Well, you don't have a camera.
I have a camera.
We can't share the slides.
Ah.
There's a problem.
Okay.
Sorry about that. So we go by wording only. You have to look at my dull face. I have a very nice set of slides, but this is just like a pre-review of the idea. We call it, with one word, a wreck aquarium. And it's not a new idea. There are half a dozen of wreck aquariums around the world, from Singapore to Texas and so forth. But one common thing between them all is that the wreck is artificial. It's either plastic, concrete, or something. There isn't a single wreck aquarium on Earth yet. However, of course, everybody's aware of the Amsterdam plan in the Netherlands, where they plan to remove the wreck of Amsterdam from the shores of Isle of Wight, if I recall right, anywhere, some part southern England, and then establish a museum around it. But there again, you only have the wreck. As in Finland, our most, let's say, antiquaristically prominent wrecks, yeah, there's a hint that they are uninteresting to me, because anything newer than 700 years is like yesterday. So, but I still acknowledge that they are very graphical, very prominent for the public, and we have to bear with them in order to get the public interested in our underwater heritage. If we put one of those into aquarium, then that would, the load alone, the cargo alone that the ships have, would take decades to extract and to conserve, and everything could be under the glass, so that people would actually see the maritime archaeological work in action. And anybody who has ever visited an aquarium knows what the rush hour is. You get the idea? It's the very moment when the fish are fed, so when you have people in the water. Now with the wreck aquarium, you would have constantly people in the water. Those of you who have visited the National Aquarium of Denmark know that that has already been taken a step further there. They have currently about 1.5 year queue for sports divers to participate in feeding the fish. They have every day they have half a dozen of sports divers participating there, and that has brought huge success, not only among the divers but also the visitors. We humans are just built so that it's much more interesting to see a human underwater, probably posing as a clown among the fish, even though we come to see the fish technically, but then again we want to see the human in the underwater. So exploiting those ideas, and I must hint that I have a background in tourism and in advertising, so I'm also to blame about that the science is not boasting the world right now. But based on those facts and what quite cold-blooded utilizing one of the most successful if not the most successful museum in Europe, the Vasa Museum, the only one that for fact can be known sustains itself. They get about 1.5 million visitors per year, and they need no funding from government or from the third sector. But that's the only one I'm aware of in Europe. The Louvre is a runner-up, but I recall that they cannot sustain the buildings by themselves. So the most successful museum, if one so can say, in Finland is the Heureka at Vantaa, which costed back in the day about 50 million to produce, and produces annual costs about 10.4 million. They have about 3,500 visitors per year, about 500,000 when they opened. Then again, the Denmark's National Aquarium, right there, wow architecture, if one can say. They estimated that they're going to have about 550,000 visitors per year, but when they opened, they hit 1.3 million. And when they analyzed it, more than or close to 1 million were visitors who had also visited Vasa. So, there's a pretty good connection how you could replicate the success of Danish National Aquarium in Finland if we produced a site where action would be, not the connection, would be the program of the day. I would say that having worked in tourism for 20 years, it would be not exaggeration saying that we would get 500,000 visitors from those 1.5 that visit Vasa Museum. Almost anybody arriving outside Sweden looks Scandinavia, Fennoscandia area as just one area. I have had highly educated Brits asking me, remind me, what's the flag of the Nordic countries? So we are kind of considered as a state among city. So now we have the goal of having this ready by the end of the decade, and we start contacting the major financial bodies to raise some 70 million to build it, and then an annual 7 to 9 million to maintain it for the next year. And well, here in these 4 pictures, you pretty much see the whole story. Wow architecture, wreck underwater, people observing the humans working on it. And I think one of the reasons why we were just selected to be one of the presenters in the final event of the National Year of Science, or let's say research information, was that our content appeals to every age group, from children to elderly. And not many science can say that. So, thank you.
One thing Markku didn't mention is that before this final goal, we need to have an institute for marine archaeology, which is governing this museum or aquarium or whatever you call it. And that's the first step we go.
Thank you. I'm sorry that I'm kind of pushing you, but we are running half an hour late. And so we still have 2 things to do. So first of all, I would like to ask Alan and Manuel come here with me. So, and maybe Mika also, as a representative of Finnish Divers Federation. So the idea is to kind of keep on doing this sustainable work, and we are going to launch a competition for diving clubs to make an act of sustainability. It can be a small thing, and then in the end of the competition, So then this will be done in collaboration with DAN Europe and then with the Finnish Divers Federation. So then the club will be rewarded. And so we get back to the details in a Sukeltajalehti, so Finnish Divers magazine. And but we wanted to launch the competition now. And as I said, the details comes later. Thank you. And then Roope, your final words.
Well, hopefully they not be my final words, but instead I'll try to wrap up just a sec. All right, get myself wired up. And okay, first of all, thanks to all of you speakers. Very, very good presentations today. You hear me all right? Very, very good presentations today. Very diverse, different aspects of climate change, diving, science, everything. I really like the diversity of what we have today. And I was thinking of just going through the program here and commenting on whatever was brought up. First of all, I would like to commend Mr. Ilari Kurri, the director of the governing body of Suomenlinna. I've been sitting to several million seminars and symposium and all that, and we always would have this dignitary and who is somehow connected to the venue or anything like that, and give a few opening remarks. But at this time, I think I have never ever had an opener who had so thoroughly actually looked into what we are trying to achieve and what was the idea of this seminar. So he had done his homework very well, and I suspect, Minna, that you had briefed him thoroughly. But obviously he seemed interested in what we do, and he pointed out the fact that what we're trying to achieve here today and in future is quite well connected with Suomenlinna. And I think that was a very good thing and very, very well done of him. So please convey my words to him if he's not watching. The next were you, Minna, and it very naturally fell in with the Suomenlinna and the End of Glory Days project, which you're involved in your previous dissertation work on recycling ships that have been significant part of the formation of this island fortress, which is the World Heritage place, and also I continue to love your humanism and your existentialism and your emotions, which is just like it's so good in comparison to like us guys in the Bodyvan, and we were like cut, slap, hard tech, do your thing, being scientists and all that. So you're actually able to combine all that, and you could tell us about the project and everything that it means, not only to you but to us all. So it was a very nice presentation, and I am happy to have prodded you on your butt to get your dissertation. Folks, she is the first maritime archaeologist to achieve her doctorate in Finland, so she is special, always been that way. And then our main guests, Alana and Manu, thank you very much for your very inspirational, well designed presentation. You were very convincing, and you could very, very well and clearly show us what you had done and how much you've done, all the way you traveled and what you've seen, the people you met. And one point in your presentation that I really liked was that, I think it was Manu who said it, that if something like this is to work out, it needs to be good business, and it needs to work business-wise. And this is something that too often, when we get emotional or just fired up otherwise, this is something that we forget. And this is the key thing. And actually we have already seen, both in Finland and internationally, that many companies who were the bold and brave ones, who seized the moment, carpe diem, and took all these new regulations, environmental demands, not as a hindrance, but as an opportunity, and went on and developed new technology, new methods, new business, have actually become quite successful. And this was a very good thing to bring out. And mostly it's your enthusiasm and your positive attitude. I really like that. Thank you very much. And I wish you every success in your continuation. It's a pity you can't go to Russia, because I know that there are a lot of divers in Russia and a lot of people who are very, very environmentally conscious, and especially being a Russian citizen, there's a good reason for that. But unfortunately today, the possibility, you can't go there, but hopefully you get to go there in the future. And I might be able to put you in contact with some diving people there who are very concerned about the environment and the underwater natural heritage as well. Yeah, okay. Sanni, thank you very much for being here. I suspect again that Minna has her fingers in the game getting you here. This is something that we haven't had in diving or maritime archaeology or scientific diving or maritime science symposia before, and I really liked your presentation. Like I commented already, you took apart something that to most of us is just a block of things or feelings or anything, and all too often we're not able to understand it. But once you do it the way you do, and actually I had to grow up to the ripe age of over 60 years before I ever, for work psychology reasons, I encountered your colleague who was actually able to do the same process for me and showed to me that actually the reason why certain things that I've been working on that didn't happen and I had no effect or no possible means of affecting them, and that they didn't succeed. So it was not because I am a dumb bastard and can't do nothing right. And she could do the same process. So thank you for that. I think it was really, really worthwhile, and I think we all should really consider what she said. It's a very important thing not to feel guilty for things, but instead to go forward. What I said myself, one thing I would like to make clear is that even though I talked about removing Sweden or Denmark or whatever, I don't really mean it. I mean, for Badevanne alone, we have had divers, Swedish divers, Danish divers, we still have. So it's a scientific joke, if you like. When you have different scales, like time scales, the fact is that the old DRC was the best water exchange phase in the Baltic natural history, and then it was through Sweden, where you have, and actually the big deep lake Vättern. That lake is actually a meromictic lake. It's very deep. It's over 100 meters deep, and there is actually salt water, anoxic salt water, near the bottom, which is remaining from that connection. So it was true. I can prove you that. Okay, Ed, thank you very much for a very good presentation. And first of all, I'm trying to lift my own tail here a little bit. I'm very happy that Badevanne has not only been able to develop all the scientific work for you guys, but also we were able to deliver Ed for the academy. And he was the right man in the right spot, and everything you said here today is just amplifies and underlines the fact that we chose the right guy. And both the occupational scientific diving and which you also addressed, the citizen science. We actually heard the last presentation by David. That was actually a very good and throughout presentation on what citizen science can achieve. Don't you agree, Minna, if we, like Syke or National Board of Antiquities, the Heritage Board, tried to put up an operation like that, how much would it cost? Too much. Too much. It would never happen. And this is the future, actually. Going to David's presentation, something like this will happen more and more. We have enthusiastic people who want to dive, and the thrill of being underwater will last only that long. Then you need to take your thing deeper. You need to have missions to fly, so to say. You need to have something meaningful to do with your hobby. And what is better than citizen science, environment, underwater cultural heritage, whatever. And when you bring these people together and have bold people to gather them all together, which is a good job that the Maritime Archaeological Society has done, then you achieve incredible things. And as an end remark, I think that we all have here today showed that there is no reason to wait for the four riders, the pale riders, but instead ride our own seahorses and get the job done. Thank you very much. This has been a very, very enthusiastic and inspiring seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, and on behalf of the DAN Europe, so I want to also thank all the speakers, in particular Minna, who has been doing an enormous work with this venue organization and finding the right speakers. So thank you, Minna, for this. It has been fun to work this together. We can do this another time too. Okay, thank you.